Happy Friday, everybody, or Friday for us. When this is produced, it may not be Friday, but maybe it will be. You never know. But welcome to the Blueprint Roundtable. You got myself, Chrissy Mazzano, Chuck Brotman, and Emily Bell. And today we are going to talk about a question, potentially a debate, around is it unethical to back channel candidates that you're looking to hire, right? So, for the, conversation, I'll let one of you, I'll kick it off on your thoughts. And let's go around the table to share what we think about this.
I can go first, Emily. Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
It's an interesting question. I know I've shared with you all in the past. I think in general, if we're talking about individual contributor roles, I do think it's unethical and also unnecessary in most cases. Unethical because at a fundamental level, and I think particularly in a market like what we're seeing today, that is becoming in some way more of a company market, it's making an assumption that one can take on, that a candidate is willing to take on some of the risk in a job search. Because at a fundamental level, if you are contacting potential references without getting upfront permission from a candidate, where you're making assumptions that the activities you're undertaking don't put their current job or work at risk. And I think anytime you do that without communication, it's unethical. Now, there are certainly ways that can be done that mitigate the risk to a candidate, perhaps by telling applicants upfront that back channeling is a part of your process. So they know going into it that anybody in their network potentially could be contacted. But assuming that's not done, that's the problem I have with it. I also think, and maybe we can discuss later if interested, but I think most often it's also not required insofar as if you feel like there's specific people you need to contact in a candidate's network, ask them up front for permission to have that conversation. And if they're not willing to grant that, you can dig deeper there, but have that conversation. So that's my general point of view on this. Emily, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. Transparency is everything on that, right? Like, I think that, personal example, I was engaged by someone kind of going in that approach and was asking me about an individual that I hadn't worked with in probably 8-9 years. And while it was a positive experience, I have no idea what the current, landscape for that individual's, work looks like. So I probably wouldn't be the best reference or most accurate because there could be things going on there that I'm not aware of because it's been so much time. Yeah. So I think that, I think in a lot of cases it's not needed. And I think as long as there's transparency and you're looking into, folks that would be relevant to their current state of work is really important if you are going to do it. But I think having transparency with the candidate, letting them know, as it's in this scenario, I actually reached out to that individual and let them know that I'd been asked about it because it just felt odd to, be a point of yes or no and a potential job opportunity when it had been so long since we had even spoken. So, out of professional courtesy, had kind of let them know that was, as I was engaged. And so, ended up being okay with it and thanked me for, the positive feedback, but it felt a little weird. And, I think just making sure that it's relevant to their current work and skills and behaviors that you're assessing for is key if you're going to do it.
Yep.
Yeah. I agree with overall's points. I think for me, it's less about it being unethical and more about it's just not a good practice. When I think about things from an outcome perspective, and I'm very big on like, what is the outcome that you're trying to get to, right? And if you have an interview process and how you interview and you do all these things, why do you need to back channel, right? In order to validate all of the work that you just did. If you're having to do that, one, it's like, what's the point of you having a process if you don't believe in it? Two, there's just so much ambiguity and so much messiness that comes. It's not as straightforward like, oh, someone knows them. Now they're going to give me the real insight because they're my friend. Well, that's just incorrect. And it's an incorrect assumption. You don't know how that person worked with them, in what capacity, if they have biases against them unconsciously or consciously. You don't know. Like they could actually be giving you advice. Oh yeah, they were great. They were wonderful. Like they always hit their number. And what you don't realize is like, they hardly ever worked with them. They never saw the toxic side. They were a cancer to your team, and they had a territory that was just easy as all get out and was worked, right? And everyone else didn't. Like there's a lot of complexity there. And so if you've gone through that whole like process to discover those things, it actually will. I think people just don't believe in hiring process, right? That's like that's what we're really getting into is they're like, I want to have a process. It's important. But at the end of the day, I really don't think that's a good way to like really know who you're talking to. And again, like you just, I think we've seen like a few times, and we've all done probably back channeling. I mean, I know as a hiring manager, like I think I've done it once or twice. And so I'm not sitting here, like I'm preaching to the choir to some extent, right? But like I've definitely done it. And it just wasn't, I think I understand the intent behind wanting to do it, but I don't think that is the best way to get your outcome. Maybe for a leadership role, you can dig in, but you've got to really it's a reference check, right? Like, or if you're going to do that, hey, I know someone, I'm going to talk to them, right? I think that's the way to do it if you're really confident about it versus, doing it behind the scenes in a sneaky way. Like you're going to get insight. That's not the best approach for multiple reasons. And it's not really going to I actually have never seen that help people in the way that they think it does. So.
Yeah. I mean, since you mentioned, I've done it many, many times as a hiring manager I've back channeled others. It's, I don't know if it's you. But
actually here's where the truth comes in. Did you do that to me when you were hiring me?
And I've shared this, I think, on LinkedIn previously. It's something I've revisited, and I certainly understand why hiring leaders do it, particularly in a market like today. I mean, the thought process goes like something as follows. This is a really critical hire. We do have a hiring process. We feel like it's well designed, but it behooves me to leverage my network to get the unvarnished truth before I make a hire in a competitive market. So I understand that logic, but to your point, I think people often overestimate the insights and values of their network, right? But even regardless, the other thing too is, to me, there really is a risk and fairness aspect to it. You are making an assumption that your activities will not come back and adversely impact somebody else. And that's just not, the more I reflect on it, that's not my prerogative or anyone's to make. Again, with the exception, if you disclose that up front, or I suppose in leadership hiring, it's kind of table stakes, right? When you're interviewing for leadership roles, you need to go into that process with the expectation that you will be researched. Although I suppose one could argue even there, it's maybe a questionable practice. I think it's going to be hard to see that changing, but certainly for IC role. And I also think too, and we can talk about diversity and inclusion, but here again, if you've got an authentic commitment to building diverse teams and opening up opportunity to people from all walks of life, including those who, historically don't benefit from prepackaged relationships, you have to call this into question. And this is where, I feel like DEI people often fall short of their stated objectives of really promoting, equitable hiring. If you're really an advocate for that and for the spirit of DEI, you have to take issue with this practice. And I'm sure many do, but ultimately it's about acknowledging that the folks who, generally speaking, will do best under the scrutiny of the back channel are those who historically have more privilege and benefit than others. So that's my point of view on it. The more I've thought about it.
Actually, a great point. I'm thinking of some people in general that we inherited at other companies that were back channeled by VC to VCs. And the VCs were like, these are excellent. And they were nightmare employees. Nightmare employees.
Yeah. Right.
Like I couldn't write on paper a worse employee than what was contributed. But these VCs said they're great because they play golf with their uncle or their dad. And that is the reality of actually really when backchilling happens, it's coming from that avenue, right? And that goes to diversity. It goes to a lot of different things.
If you want an example of the persona of somebody who benefits immensely from back channel, I'll paint a picture of the mediocre, underachieving, mischievous offspring of a well-connected VC in Silicon Valley, right? Didn't do well in college, struggled to hold down a job, but has parents who are very well connected. And it's precisely the individual who will benefit from back channel and from the relationship to help them get access to opportunity, to set them straight and give them more opportunity. And if you don't come from that socioeconomic background and you have, anything comparably similar, you're never finding a job, right? It's grossly unfair. So
it's unfair too that the subjectivity that would be introduced to it. It could go either way so quickly that I don't think it's a stable way of truly assessing a candidate's fit for your organization. We've all worked in environments that are drastically different from one another, that some you thrive in, some you don't, some are toxic. And that's why, and they might not be toxic for all individuals there. So the perception of what was happening that wasn't working would be different across various people, all within the same organization. And it's just ripe for unconscious bias. And I think if you're going to do it, transparency is key. So you could potentially get added context from your candidate on what they might encounter if you are dead set on doing it. I think that's the only fair way to at least have a benchmark of what you might hear versus what your perception of the candidate might be.
Right. Put it on your job description and open that when you have your initial conversation. Share with candidates that back channeling is a part of our process. If you have any concerns up front before we go forward, I want to give you an opportunity to share.
Yeah. Right.
I think that's the only way to go about it.
It can really, you can be on just going back to something that you were saying, Chuck, for people benefiting, it can sway you into a hire for someone that you're on the fence about. That is, you should be on the fence about them. And in fact, if you did a couple more interviews, holy shit, good thing we didn't hire that person, right? But now you just talked to Mr. Investor who said, oh, they're great. They're great. Wonderful kid, wonderful family, solid background. And it's you're forgetting the part of absolute asshole, who literally will come in and terrorize their team. But they haven't experienced that, right? So, but also on the other side, what I would say is we all have been, I think, great employees at the organizations that we worked at and led at, and even today, right? Have we ever been in an environment where someone has not liked us, whether it was a leader or a peer? Yes, no one has been in an environment where that hasn't happened, right? And so whether it's you were on the wrong side or the right side, everyone has an exposure. And that person that doesn't like you, that could actually not be a great person, is not perceived as a bad person to someone else. That might be their connection. And so if you go and back channel someone from one person that didn't like them, when they have an outstanding reputation, because that's very possible that could happen. Now you're getting insight for someone that actually has a totally different view of who this person is, may not have the best intentions, but you've never seen that person that you're talking to treat someone in a way that would get a different reaction, right? So there's just what sound good on paper a lot of times, we have to just be more open to realizing that that's just not how life always works, right? And we have to be willing to evolve. I think we do things when we're really comfortable because that's how it always has been, right? But evolving is a part of being a human being, right? What you cared about at 5 years old is very different probably than what you care about today. And that's a bad thing. You grow and you learn. And it's not to shame people who have done it. And we've all done it before. It's to say, is this really the most effective way to get my outcome? And there are a lot of actual nuances and challenges here that really aren't setting me up to be successful. That could actually cause more harm than good, right? And I think the answer to that is this does cause more harm than good, especially if you're not being transparent about it, right? If you're being transparent, okay, at least, because again, you want to make sure that you have context for both sides, right? But I think the benefiting of people who you can be swayed by them saying yes when they've never worked with that person in that capacity and they have no idea, and you need to make sure your process is what really irons that out, not what someone else in Silicon Valley says. But
agree.
Yeah.
Great points, you all. Great points, great conversation. That's all the time we have for now. But until next time, we'll keep at it with helping people not back channel as much or thinking differently about how you back channel. So
well said. Bye, everyone.